Hey, good morning. I was going to say good morning. Good evening, folks. I've always got to adjust all this stuff. The camera changes when you get to YouTube. It's all widescreen and everything. All right, folks. Good to be here. Good to have you here tonight. I know a few of you are lining up. Rocky Stucci, who I will be on with at 11 o'clock Central, midnight Eastern time, right after we're done reading tonight, is just doing a premiere show with Jeff Dougherty, and they're just finishing up. And so I was over there, so pardon me for being a minute and a half late. I was just looking at the clock saying, oh man, I got to get over to my own channel. So I think they're just wrapping up over there. So it's good to have you here. As many of you already know, we've been doing these readings here for the last several weeks. As you know, I've done radio with Rocky, radio with Jeffrey. I've done my own radio for years. And something that was suggested to me for those of you who are new tonight was that I take some of my books and maybe read them chapter by chapter right here in my own room. And so I'm doing that. We're doing live commentary. And many of you who are already lined up in here have been here. Mark, it's good to see you. Nigel, good to see you. Thanks for coming in. Ron, good to see you too. Poltergeist moved the camera, or they moved the lenses or something. Literally, I will get all set up. It's like getting set up with radio when you've got your soundboard, your mic, and everything's all set. Then you go live and everything's wrong. We call it scintillating live radio. Well, this is scintillating live YouTube channeling. But it's wider screen. It's like, I don't know why it affects the camera differently. It accesses it differently. So, Vicky, nice to have you here. Tracy. Tracy, I heard what Rocky had to say about my figure on a show. I do not have boobs. I have man boobs. I mean, I'm a guy. I'm pushing 60. I got man boobs, but so much so that I don't show them off. But that's because of all the years of bodybuilding and weightlifting and muscles starting to be less flexible than it used to be. So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. But Rocky also said somewhere today that I have a cute butt on some radio show somewhere. So he's throwing out contradictory terms. Anyway, unless he just likes the touch of my body. I think he's mixing it up with my wife. My wife, who is gorgeous, and might we say in a very polite way, my wife is robustly endowed. And Rocky likes to hug her. So when he was talking about hugging and getting a sense of breasts, they weren't mine. He was thinking of my wife. So there you go. Iowa X, good to have you here. And Barbara, nice to see you. June, good to see you. Fran, nice to see you too. Jeannie, Barbara, Audrey, what up, Audrey? And let's see, who else do we have that I missed that's kind of initial? Mark, I think I said hi to you early on, but just in case, doing it again. And yes, any of these shows that you have missed, they are all archived down below in all my videos. You can go through and look at some of my other videos while you're here when you have time at your leisure. You can see some of the Egyptian stuff we've done, the paranormal stuff that Rocky and I have done with John Ward, as well as some of my family stuff is up in here as well. So go down there, down below into my videos, or just click on the little video link and it'll take you to all of them. And enjoy them. I hope you enjoy them. Now, as you know, I do more than just reading of my books, but that's where we've been kind of camped for the last couple of months while we read The Rise and Fall of the Nephilim, and now The Secret History of the Reptilians is the book that we're in now. This was my follow-up to the Nephilim book, and so we're going to continue on in this with chapter 3, believe it or not, and these have been some long-ass chapters. So we're just starting to get to the meat of it. And I am going to tell you and forewarn you tonight, it's a long chapter. It goes from, I think, page 88 to page 118, which is 30 pages. And generally when we're doing 30 pages, it's an hour and a half show to 2 hours. That's why people come and go and they come and pick it up later and look at it. Tonight, in about 54 minutes, I have to be on live with Rocky Stucci on the Situation Room. And come on over there if you're not finished listening to our voices yet after this next hour. Just flip back over to Rocky's channel right here on YouTube. You can also catch him on Facebook and Twitter and other places. And we've got special guest tonight, Peter Robbins. If you are into the ufological community or the research, Peter Robbins would be a familiar name to you. He wrote Left at East Gate about the Rendlesham Forest. Trying to think of the word for that experience event. And he is probably one of the most credible, most likable, lovable. Trying to think of another adjective for him. And I can't off the top of my head. They'll all just come pouring out. Person that you'd ever want to meet. And his credibility speaks volumes to the topic that he's in. So come on over. Right after this show, I'm probably just going to go and throw on a sweatshirt and get comfortable for the Rocky Stucci Situation Room. And we're going to take it from there with Peter Robbins. So I want to thank you all for being here. Thanks, everybody who's in here. Let's see. Michelle, nice to see you again. Rocky Stucci, yo. How you doing, brother? Pacific Coast, good to see you. Thanks. Yeah, that's my fun stuff. That's it's not my old big office. I miss my old office. It's like Captain Kirk in Star Trek said, I miss my old chair. In Star Trek 5, I think it was, or 6 or 7 or one of those. And I kind of miss my old office, but now we're all set back up in here, so it's working. It's okay. Thank you. Cat o' Nine Tails, good to see you. Spirit, good to see you. Kitten, glad you're here. Trapper Mike, nice to see you, buddy. Lola, nice to see you as well. So here we go. For those of you who haven't been here for the previous readings, we're in the midst of my reading this book, The Secret History of the Reptilians. And this was my follow-up to The Rise and Fall of the Nephilim, which I read last month. We read the whole book chapter by chapter and did some live commentary on it. And this book tonight, so if you have not had the advantage of hearing some of the previous chapters, we're going to pick it up in the middle. But I think you'll catch on. You'll at least enjoy where we are. And if you like what you hear, go down below and like the video. But also go back and, if you haven't heard them, catch the earlier videos again at your leisure. And you can see what we're doing here. So I'm going to pick up, this is a long chapter, as I started to say. So we may not make it through the whole chapter tonight because I've got this tight sandwich I'm in tonight. I'm in a Rocky Stucci sandwich and a Jeff Doherty sandwich. I'm in a Rocky Jeff sandwich this hour right in between. I would have gone on at 9 o'clock, but that was the premiere of the new show for Rocky and Jeff. Shut up and listen. And so tonight, being a Sunday night, maybe it's good that we're only going to go an hour. So here we go. Let's jump into it. And if you have any questions, put them in the chat room. I can't guarantee I'll see everything. I get impassioned about what I'm reading. This is stuff I've written, but sometimes I got to stop and I got to comment because it's where my head is. And some of my viewpoints have even changed a little bit since I wrote this book. This book came out in 2013, while Nephilim was 2012, the year earlier. I'm now writing another follow-up to this. I've been asked by my publisher, which was New Page Books for this one. They're still going to publish it as an imprint. They are now owned by Red Wheel Weiser. And they approached me. They called me out of the blue last week to ask if I would be interested in writing a book about the Book of Enoch. And they thought I would be the perfect author for it because of these first 2 books I wrote. So there we go. I was going somewhere with that, and I don't remember where. So let's just go with the reading, and let's get as far as we can tonight. I'm going to cut us off at about 5 minutes, 5 minutes of the hour, so you got time to go to the bathroom, get another cup of coffee, and head over to Rocky's room, where we're going to go live with Peter Robbins. So here we go, guys. Let's start. Chapter 3, coiled around many cultures. If the account given in Genesis is really true, ought we not, after all, hold on, I got to adjust my light just a little bit. If the account given in Genesis is really true, ought we not, after all, to thank this serpent? He was the first schoolmaster, the first advocate of learning, the first enemy of ignorance, the first to whisper in human ears the sacred word liberty. And that was written by Robert Greene Ingersoll, American statesman, back 1833, in that range of time. Then William Shakespeare said, look at the innocent flower, look like the innocent flower, but be the serpent under it. There's a huge difference between approaching the issue of the multicultural serpent with a broad view that religion is most often a thing that cannot be quantified to the liking of the skeptical or scientific mind, versus the brand of angry atheism tantamount to hatred of any form of religion at all. Pardon me, guys. I've got my eyes are fuzzy tonight. I got to put on my cheaters, my old man bifocals, so I can read better. There we go. Here we are. Boy, it's not much better. I think I'll struggle along without them, so I don't have to keep going like this. All right. To most skeptical thinkers and the crusading scientific atheists of today, faith is a list of pieties and practices that consist of superstitions built on the misty nothingness of ignorance and the dangerous falsehoods of faith-based thinking. I had one scientist refer to me in an open debate as an ass-plucking denialist Nephilimer. You got that? An ass-plucking denialist Nephilimer. By the way, for the record, that one scientist, that was Dr. P.Z. Myers, evolutionary biologist at the University of Minnesota, Moorhead. And he is a crusading atheist, a self-acclaimed asshole. And he is also some that got guys like Graham Hancock removed from TED and things like that. So that's what he had to say to me. We were in an open debate in front of about 500 people. And he called me an ass-plucking denialist Nephilimer. With this sort of eliminatory thinking, there's no room for the wonder of the spiritual, at least not openly admitted, and very little grasp of the way the theological incorporates critical thinking, let alone the complex phenomenology of the religious experience. Hardcore atheists are to religious believers what an office-bound, short-sleeved, horn-rimmed, spectacle-wearing, white shirt and tied accountant is to the freestyling, caution-to-the-wind, dreadlocked, barefooted, multicolored, paint-smeared, loft-dwelling artist. Pardon my stereotypes. Religion is the construct of human beings. It's the attempt to place structure on the unstructured spiritual experience. And more often than not, the foundational religious constructs evolve into a systematic set of dogmas and theologies that produce, in nearly every case, a meticulous mode of control, which bears little resemblance to the origins of the systemized structure. Spiritual experience is rarely ever something that's corporate. You get that, folks? You get that from Jeff's channel. You get that from things we've talked about for years. Corporate structure in religious or spiritual belief is nonsense, as far as I'm concerned. It's individual. That individual in turn internalizes and personally pursues his particular religion, or, as is evident throughout the history of humanity, he moves that personal experience to a place of revelation that of necessity should be shared with those around him. But many times the seeking of the like-minded followers turns heinously into sycophancy, and the establishment of a controlled system is imposed that resembles nothing of the original experiencer's spirituality. Religion contains within its symbols and myths some of the most utterly profound truths of the human psyche and even the body. But these are things that need to be properly interpreted and freed from the illusion of faith and theology in order to function. Or as Jeff would say, unindoctrinate yourself. Though faith is a thing that is necessary in most religious practices, it's also the thing that, in its simplicity, can completely obliterate the open mind. Now, see, I've turned the entire argument on its head. Science and skepticism have closed off the possibilities under the lock and key of quantifiability within a theological, quote-unquote, approach to methodology and evidentiary research. On the other hand, faithers, in opening themselves to internalizing external spiritual experience and structuring it into theology of any sort, have adopted the rigidity that comes with legalizing their acceptance of that which is unquantifiable. By legalizing, I mean, we talked about being legalistic when I was in the evangelical church. It's a nasty catch-22 of thinking, so that neither approach seems to be complete, but always lacking what the other brings to the table. Science needs faith, and faith needs science, and both need skepticism. Both are incomplete without the other, and that is the great schism of the mind. And this is what I talk about when I refer to Jeff and what he talks about, is that I'm giving you Jeff Light here in some of this stuff. The symbolism and presence of the serpent in the ancient world was highly significant. And somewhere back there, a person, a priest, or a collective of both determined that the serpent was a symbol that should be held in high esteem. Whether it was like the cat my friend and I experienced on our Sunday morning philosophical excursions, or simply a recognition that the serpent bore physical qualities that superstitiously became spiritual ones. The deifying of this reptilian creature became widespread throughout human civilization and carried to all parts of the world. Ancient societies and religious scriptures, from the cradle of civilization to the Far East and European cultures, are rife with serpentine figures, which simultaneously attributed two highly symbolic roles. One role connected serpents to the heavens in their representation as deities, creative powers, and healing entities. The second role linked them with the underworld, associating them with darkness, evil, harm, and destructive influences. Nowadays, if one just stops and considers, there should be little difficulty recognizing this dual symbolism, as it persists, perhaps not to the same theological depths as it once did, but it is there nonetheless. Look simply to the symbol of the healing serpent, the caduceus, as it appears on the physician's caduceus. The two coiled serpents wrapped around the tree, while at the same time we see the serpent as a thing to be feared and reviled, a representative of evil intent, and even as a descriptor for wily, despicable character attributes. That dude's a snake in the grass, we'll say. No matter what your religious take may be on the serpent, it's clear that nearly every civilization either deified the serpent in one form or another, or looked upon the serpent as somehow sacred or symbolic of the more esoteric values in life and nature. The serpent's dualism in the Hebrew religion is clearly seen when Moses, the giver of the law and traditional author of the Pentateuch, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy in the Old Testament, writes of the serpent in the Garden of Eden as the seducer of Eve and the catalyst for the spiritual fall of humanity, yet upholds the serpent as the symbol of divine healing when the people are smitten by venomous snakes. Remember, we talked about the whole Garden of Eden and all the language and the linguistics that were behind all the terms being used there. We read that last night. Here's a passage from Numbers 21, 5 through 9. And the people spoke against God and against Moses. Wherefore have you brought us up out of Egypt? Oh, here I'm using the King James. I naturally, when I read the King James Bible, with all the ye's and the therefores and the whereuntos, I tend to just automatically change it into modern language. There's a reason I must have put this in here in the King James. Let's read it that way. And the people spake against Moses and God. Wherefore have you brought us up out of Egypt to die in the wilderness? And there is no bread, neither is there any water. And our soul loatheth this, my spirit loatheth this bread you're giving us. Loatheth this light bread. Loathing is what the word is, loatheth. And the Lord sent fiery serpents among the people. And get this, Jeff just mentioned this tonight in his show, if you were listening to him. The same God who sends the sin also gave the remedy. The God who sends the illness makes the remedy. And the Lord sent fiery serpents among the people, and they bit the people, and much people of Israel died. Therefore, and that was the punishment for griping and complaining. I just tell my kids when they gripe and complain at me, I said, hey, knock it off, or there's going to be trouble for you. I never thought of sending serpents because to bite them with venomous fangs because my kids are griping and complaining, although there are times you'd like to give them away. Therefore, the people came to Moses and said, we have sinned, for we have spoken against the Lord and against thee. Pray unto the Lord that he take away the serpents from us. And Moses prayed for the people. And the Lord said unto Moses, make thee a fiery serpent and set it upon a pole. And it shall come to pass that everyone that is bitten, when he looketh upon it, shall live. And Moses made a serpent of brass and put it upon a pole. And it came to pass that if a serpent had bitten any man, when he beheld the serpent of brass, he lived. So you've gotten this passage, by the way, and I'm probably going to say this in the text of the book, but it comes to mind. You've got the same God who said, oh, these people piss me off. I'm going to send fiery serpents to bite them so they die. And a bunch of people died, it says. But then they prayed enough, and Moses prayed, and he stood in between the people and God said, okay, all right. Put a bronze serpent on a pole, and if anybody looks to it, they'll be healed. So the same God who sends the bites, sends the death, also provided the healing of that. And you know what's very interesting here too, by the way, we might get into this in the book, but I just want to make mention of it. Nakash, the serpent in the garden, never called Lucifer, Satan, the devil. The Hebrew word in the text in Genesis is Nakash, meaning the illuminator, the bringer of knowledge, the bright shining one. Here, when Moses puts the serpent on the pole, the Hebrew word for that, just like the word Nakash for the serpent in the garden, is the Nakashte. So it's the same character. This character that is demonized 1,000 years later as being Satan and Lucifer, and the bringer of all evil intent to mankind, and erupting the fall of man onto humanity. That same word, that same figure, the serpent, the bronze bright serpent, is raised up on a pole as a symbol of healing. All right. Moses casts a bronze shining serpent, the Nekoshet in Hebrew, the Nekoshet, and raises it on a pole. And the people who were bitten were then instructed to look at it or touch the base of the pole to be healed of the terminal bites. Christianity, in return, hailed to this miraculous healing event by equating the image of the brazen serpent elevated on the pole to the lifting up of the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. Did you know that? No one has, in John 3:13 through 15, no one has ever gone into heaven except the one who came from heaven, the Son of Man. Just as Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, so the Son of Man must be lifted up, that everyone who believes in him may have eternal life. Did you realize that? Look at all this symbolism for a second. Nakash in the garden, later referred to as Satan and Lucifer, the bringer of the fall, according to Christian theology. Nakash, the Nakashte, or the, as it says, the Nekoshet, in the wilderness, the snake, the symbol of healing, and then the comparison in the New Testament to Jesus' crucifixion being lifted up on the cross to be compared to the lifting up of the brazen serpent on a pole. I remember in previous chapters, we talked about the possibility, and some theorize, that Jesus and Lucifer were the same person in the divine council because of their titles: the son of the morning star, the protector of the glory of God, and so on. We're going to push that aside. I'm not preaching that or teaching that, just telling you there's things to take note of here. Now, although we have no idea of how this was supposed to have worked, other than the claim of a divine power, we also have no idea how much time passed and how many people died between conception of the divine brassy serpent, its sculpting, design, and casting, to the final elevation on the pole. The story expounds on sacred symbolism over the sacred value of human life. The emphasis of the story demonstrating that the serpent was to be viewed as both the agent of harm and the agent of healing, the bringer of death and the giver of life, perhaps paying homage to the fall of humanity, while at the same time revering the serpent as the deliverer of esoteric knowledge of the gods. The Hebrews sinned before their God, and fiery serpents were sent to bite them as a divine punishment. In response, Moses crafted a bronze image of the venomous serpent, and the people were healed and ultimately spared by simply looking at it or touching the pole on which it had been erected. And I'm going to repeat this. The story expounds on sacred symbolism over the sacred value of human life. I always wondered about that. All this death that you see in the Old Testament scriptures, God bringing death on this group or that group, his own people, the Israelites, the earth opening up and sucking down half of the Israelites when they defied Moses and he broke the 10 Commandments and the whole making of the golden calf thing. He just destroys them all. Here, how many people died in the wilderness with the snake bite so God could prove a point of some kind about sacred symbolism? These are things that bother me and still bother. They bothered me then. They bother me now. Let's see. The intent of the biblical passage is to illuminate that it is none other than God, Elohim or Jehovah, who is the power working behind the image of the serpent. It is the paradoxical Jehovah who is at once the instigator of both death and life. This would probably be Elohim and not Jehovah. I didn't clarify that because I wasn't, when I wrote this book, I was still deciphering all this Elohim and Jehovah stuff, and I may have interchanged them. I caught that last night as well. So I've got to look into this and make sure I'm correct here on using Jehovah opposed to Elohim, who, by the way, were not the same person. He's the instigator of both death and life. And as God was so often wont to do in Hebrew scriptures, he allows for, and in this case is the originator of, the death calamity in order to establish both his magnificent terror and beneficent grace in being the God who imposes harsh judgment, as well as the God who offers a way out, salvation, and healing. To some, this may smack of a sort of divine Munchausen syndrome, Munchausen by proxy syndrome. But for the Hebrews, it was their God at work. What is clear is that the Israelites were already quite familiar with the images of deified serpents from their exposure to Egyptian mysticism and mythology during the 4 centuries they dwelled in Egypt, either as slaves or as workers. And keep in mind that after 400 years, they were clearly Egyptianized, these people, these Israelites. In a similar way as if you were descendants of an Englishman who traveled to America on the Mayflower in 1620 and whose descendants remained here all those generations up until the current day. You would be considered English by ancestry alone, but you would be in actuality completely American. Same deal with the Hebrews in Egypt. The Hebrews were barely even Hebrews anymore at the time of the Exodus. They had a vestige of their heritage kept alive in oral tradition and religious practice, but had completely forgotten who they were as evidenced by the machinations Moses had to go through to keep convincing them that Jehovah was their God. They were Egyptians, but Moses came to lead them back to their ancestral promised land. And in the harshness of judgment, the serpent symbol is now seen by the Hebrews in its true light, a valid and important representation of their ancient God's ultimate power over life and death. Their life and death. What is established to them in the symbol of the bronze serpent is that God was the divine force behind the serpent figure. Now put that in your Edenic pipe and smoke it. All right. I'm going to see if there's anything here that needs to be referenced in the chat room. See what you got going on over here. The beast is fur, my mammal friends, so on and so forth. Yes. I use the Bible for reference, the extra biblical writings add to the overall narrative of faith and history. I agree, Ron. Let's see. Kat asked Jeff about Moses versus Ramses high priests. The staffs turning to snakes. His one ate the two, but what was really interesting is that I never got a reply from anyone asking about it. I'll tell you this, Kat, just not to rabbit trail too far here, but first of all, Moses and Ramses, that is a historical mistake. Moses never met Ramses his entire life. Ramses came to the throne. Ramses II would be Ramses the Great, came to the throne around 1250 BCE, thereabouts. Moses and the Exodus would have been around 1445, 46 BC, which was 200 years earlier than the birth of Ramses II. And the Exodus itself would have been right around 1400 BC. And by the way, there's a way to establish that. It's the destruction of the city of Jericho. And we talked about this in reading the last book. If you want to date the Exodus, you can find keystone dates in the Bible. 1 Kings 6:1 talks about 480 years after the Exodus, Solomon dedicates the temple in Jerusalem. That's your first keystone date. Another thing is history. You look at, according to the Bible, that the Israelites, after the death of Moses, after 40 years after the Exodus, wandering in the wilderness, they came to the city of Jericho. And that was their first attack and their first conquer in the land of Canaan, the promised land, the city of Jericho. And we all know the old story, and the walls came tumbling down. Well, that city, according to the mound that still exists outside current day Jericho in Jordan, that city is the destruction of the walls, which, by the way, they have found were tumbled outward. They want to say it was earthquake, it was this, it was that, it was invasion, but the walls are definitely tumbled outward from the city, which is an interesting fact. But that city's destruction dates to 1400 BCE. Now, if Joshua, leading the armies of the Israelites, 40 years after the Exodus, conquers the city of Jericho, and the walls come tumbling down, that would have had to have been in 1400 BC. Because the city of Jericho at 1400's destruction was not rebuilt for another 800 years. We would have been all the way up into the 900s BCE before, I'm sorry, not the 900s, I'm doing my math backwards. 1400 take away 900 or 800. You're looking at 600 BCE. You're way far out of the Egyptian dynasties that would have fit into this story. Now, where you see in the Bible where it refers to Ramses, it says, in the book of Exodus, it says, and the Israelites built the treasure cities of Pithom and Ramses, which in history was Pi-Ramses, the cities built by Ramses II. Well, there it is, right there. The Bible says they built the treasure cities of Pithom and Ramses, Pi-Ramses. Some things you have to take into consideration. Number one is that we don't have the original text, and the Old Testament text, the books of the law, the books of Moses, were recompiled and rewritten in the 400s BCE after Israel had been taken into captivity by Babylon, then let loose to go back to their homeland and they sent 72 rabbis to the Library of Alexandria and asked permission of Ptolemy II, the Grecian pharaoh of Egypt at the time, for permission to go there to the library and reconstruct the scriptures, the Hebrew scriptures, which they did. Their work gave us what's known as the Septuagint or the Septuaginta. And that book, collection of books that they put together in Greek, which was the language of commerce of the day, that's your Old Testament. You go to your Old Testament Bible, look, that's the Septuagint. Well, now, here's the thing. That's 1,000 years after the fact, after the Exodus, after Jericho, after Moses. This is 400 BCE we're talking about. Now, what has happened in the reconstruction is they said, oh, that city that's there, that's Pi-Ramses, that's the city that was built by the Hebrews during slavery. What they forgot during the time, and we've only found through archaeology, is the city of Pi-Ramses was Ramses II's rebuilding of an older city, which the ruins are still beneath that city, the city of Avaris. And Avaris is the city that is earmarked by all sorts of Canaanite or Hebrew types of artifacts and homes and things like that. Avaris was the city that was built by the Hebrews. It's the city where, in the older story in the Bible, Joseph had his palace in Egypt, in Avaris. Now, several years had gone by when Ramses came along, a couple 300 years later, and took that city and reclaimed it and rebuilt it as Pi-Ramses. Therefore, 1,000 years later, these writers in antiquity said the Hebrews built the cities of, what was the name of that city? Oh, it's Pi-Ramses over there. So there you go. That's how it works, Kat. So there you go. Sorry for that rabbit trail, folks. It's a pet topic of mine, so I got to say it. Ramses, sorry, Yul Brynner, Ramses was not the pharaoh of the Exodus. Ramses never knew Moses. He probably heard the stories, I'm sure, but he was not the pharaoh of the Exodus. And if you're interested, Amenhotep II was the pharaoh of the Exodus. That's another book. All right, next section, the Snake Marsh of Eridu. We mentioned this already. When we consider the Sumerians' creator god, Enki, paralleled by the neighboring Akkadian god Ea, as being connected through both ancient and modern mythology to a place called the Snake Marsh, coupled with the fact that we've already established that Enki Ea is a linguistic precursor to Yahweh, Jehovah, the Middle East becomes the hotbed of early serpent mythology. The parallel being, of course, that Enki, the brother god to Enlil, the chief god of the Anunnaki, was not only responsible for the creation of intelligent mankind as a slave race at the behest of Enlil, but he also saw the humans' plight and led them into insurrection against the Anunnaki, which was the caste of gods. Like the Anunnaki, for all the hubbub and hullabaloo it's given with ancient aliens and things like that, the Anunnaki were simply the Olympians of the Sumerian culture. Let's see, the parallel behind the Anunnaki was not only responsible for the creation of, I read that, the plight that led them to the inners, blah, blah, blah. As we saw earlier, Enki Ea is the prototype for the Hebrew Jehovah. And they played very similar functions as both creatures and saviors, creators, and saviors. And the serpent symbolism is connected to both of them. You're welcome, Kat. In his fairly complex book, Deliver Me from Evil. Oh, wait, I just saw something. Jeannie says, too many years, that doesn't match up. Not sure what you're talking about there, Jeannie, about the years. Anyway, we'll maybe hit that a little later. In his fairly complex book, Deliver Me from Evil, Mesopotamian Incantations, 2500 to 1500 BCE, Oxford University researcher Graham Cunningham examines Sumerian tablets predating the time known as the Sargonic period in ancient Mesopotamia. Get your history caps on, folks. This is fun. This is fantastically glorious, fun, amazing, exciting, electrifying stuff. Okay, listen on. He examines the Sumerian tablets, predating the time known as the Sargonic period in ancient Mesopotamia, which extended from approximately the 22nd to the 23rd centuries BCE. During this earlier period in Sumer, there are many cuneiform tablets consisting of magical incantations for both helpful and harmful divine ritual intervention. In these tablets, we find there are 2 specific incantations associating Enki-Ea with various agents of illness. In other words, the summoning of infliction, harm, or illness on someone else. That's, in other words, making someone else sick by a magic spell. In these incantations, there's a reference to the snake of Enki, while the other mentions the place of the black snake in the middle of the Abzu. Remember, the Abzu is the big underworld sea that Enki has been cast to. Remember the term Abzu? I'm going to talk about it now. This is the great underworld sea on which the city of Eridu sits, and mythical, I should say, on which Eridu sits. And surrounding the city lies the swampy region. It's the backwaters of the Euphrates, known as the Snake Marsh, a place, according to mythology, well known and loved by Enki-Ea. The incantations also mention a black dog, a horned snake, a serpent, and Enki himself. This association between Enki-Ea and harmful snakes continues well into the old Babylonian period. And there is even one incantation directed against various snakes referred to as the 2-tongued snake of Abzu. Other incantations show that Enki-Ea could cure as well as cause illness. Remember Moses and the brazen serpent on the pole? And then there's the particular repeating phrase in the incantation saying, Ea did it, Ea undid it. That'd make a great t-shirt. Ea did it, Ea undid it. In essence, God brought catastrophe, God brought healing. Enmerkar and the Lord of Aratta is a mythical Sumerian epic in which a speech is delivered by Enmerkar, the son of Meshki-Angesher, the founder of the first dynasty of Uruk and the builder of the city of Uruk. In that speech, he delivers a magical incantation for the purpose of confusing the various languages of the people. Note the striking similarities to the Genesis account of the Tower of Babel. Listen to this. This is from the old cuneiform, Sumerian cuneiform texts. Once upon a time, there was no snake. There was no scorpion. There was no hyena. There was no lion. There was no wild dog, no wolf. There was no fear, no terror. Men had no rival. In those days, the lands of Subar and Hamazi, harmony-tongued Sumer, the great land of the decrees of princeship, Uri, the land having all that is appropriate, the land of Martu, resting in security, the whole universe, the people in unison, to Elil in one tongue spoke. Then Enki, the Lord of abundance, whose commands are trustworthy, the Lord of wisdom, who understands the land, the leader of the gods, endowed with wisdom, the Lord of Eridu, changed the speech in their mouths, brought contention into it, into the speech of man until they had been one. In the book of Genesis, God comes down to earth and confuses the languages of humanity, causing them to disperse. For some reason, he did not want the humans working in a unified fashion, as they were building their giant ziggurat to reach the heavens in Genesis 11:14. Enki-Ea plays this very same language dispersing role in the Sumerian version of the tale. So again, we see the correlation between Enki-Ea and Jehovah of the Old Testament. and the serpent slithers in and out through the narratives. On one of many Akkadian green jasper cylinder seals, dating back 2000 and 2300 BC, there is an impression of the god Enki Ea in a reed-filled marshland setting, standing in a shallow draft boat constructed out of the long reeds growing in the marsh, traditional to the inhabitants of the area. It is obvious that the central figure in the boat is none other than Enki, as evidenced by the ever-present dual streams of water emerging from his shoulders and the fish leaping from those streams. Let me show you, because I can't put it up on my screen yet. I haven't figured that out yet. But there's the cylinder seal, and you'll see Enki. He's got the water. It's hard to point at it. You see the central figure. He's got those lines coming out and down on both sides of his shoulders. That's the water. That's Enki and his boatman and some other guy. We'll mention him. They're in the Serpent's Marsh. You see the reeds in the marshy area. And that's a reed boat, by the way. Traditional historical reed boat. Here we go. Going on. The boat pictured on the cylinder is being guided through the heavily reeded waters by two servants, both holding punting poles in their hands, while out of the water at the boat's fore and aft are fish leaping into the air, presumably greeting their creator in joyous worship. The entire setting on the cylinder is meant to evoke beauty and worshipful honor of Enki. One of the men standing in the boat with Enki is more likely the man who never left his side, Adapa, the first human created by Enki. Adapa became the god's personal servant, baking daily fresh bread and fishing for his god's meals. In Sumerian hymns, it is said of Enki that his greatest pastime was to navigate the waters of the Snake Marsh in his boat, known as the Ibex of the Abzu. It was here in the Snake Marsh that Enki is said to have lived in his mythical sea house, which metaphorically cast its shadow over the waters of the Snake Marsh. If you visit the site of Eridu today, the real city site, the ruins or the remains of that site, snakes can still be seen gliding across the surface of the water, forever reminding us why, after thousands of passing years, the place was given its original name. And as we read here, this is another painting that I got the rights to use from Balazs Ballot, who has his website is archaeologyillustrated.com. This is the harbor of ancient Eridu with a boat carrying the statue of their patron god Enki, as envisioned by archaeological artist Balazs. And that would be a picture of what the reed boats look like. I wish I could do better than this, folks. Sorry about that. There's the reed boat, the backwaters of the Euphrates River, and the city of Eridu. So, although in the ancient tablets, amplified to otherworldly proportions in the modern mythologies of the Anunnaki found in the works of Zechariah Sitchin and others, it is said that Enki Ea led a rebellion against his brother gods of the Anunnaki, becoming the first freedom fighter for the human race. And this was at the behest of the human king Atrahasis. His base of operations being the Snake Marsh or the Den of Serpents known as Ea's Den. We'll expand on this in a greater detail in the next chapter. Around the world, the next section, we've got only 10 minutes left before I've got to bolt and go live with Rocky Stucci. I'm wondering if we can... This section is pretty long. Damn it. I'm just into it, too. I'll give you the first paragraph of this, and then we'll quit and we'll go to some questions, have a little discussion here. The next section in this chapter is called Around the World in 80 Serpents. Well, not quite 80, but when you consider all of the civilizations, ancient, archaic, and modern, that revere or worship the serpent in some form, the list is staggering. World religion, cultural mythology, and archaic literature represent the serpent as having become synonymous with the act of fertility, life force, and creative power. This is why you see the reptilian so prominent in mythos and archaic literature. The fertility and sexual lineage or linkage is partly due to snakes being seen as figuratively phallic in form. And if you don't know what phallic means, ask Rocky Stucci. And symbolically synonymous of the male sex organ. Well, there, that gave it away. You're off the hook, Rocky. Not to mention the linkage to the Garden of Eden story of impregnation at the seduction of the serpent character. Serpents also may become associated with water and earth due to the many species of snakes that live in the water or in the holes in the ground, and agriculture as their dwellings were in the ground and amongst the roots and the plants. It's 10:51. I'm going to go just a few more minutes. I'm going to risk it. We're going to roll the die here. Give me a couple more minutes and I'll let you go. So you can either go and have the rest of the evening to yourself, or you can come prep yourself and come over to Rocky's and my show. The ancient Chinese linked the serpent with the gods of the rain, a life-giving symbol of fertility and abundance in their agrarian culture. Australia, India, North America, and Africa have all linked snakes with rain and rainbows, bringing to mind the aptly titled 1985 book by Wade Davis and subsequent motion picture, great picture, by the way, The Serpent and the Rainbow, exploring the voodoo, zombie, and reincarnating resurrection practices in the Caribbean, which again are connected with rain and ultimately agricultural fertility. Sorry, that was before the parentheses. Which again are connected with rain and, cultural symbolism of rebirth, resurrection, transformative power, immortality, and healing, as with the brazen serpent of Moses, became strong spiritual aspects of the serpent. This is linked to the serpent's seasonal shedding of its outer skin, the aboros, a natural physical occurrence called slowing, S-L-O-U-G-H-I-N-G. This became a demonstrable natural symbolism for resurrection, eternity, and the perpetual renewal of life. In the two major world religions said to have spouted from the loins of Abraham, Judaism and Islam, the serpent was representative of sexual desire, reestablishing the sexual nature of the Garden of Eden story. Again, reaffirming this idea, rabbinic tradition holds that the serpent in the Garden of Eden is illustrative of sexual passion and lustful desire. I find it interesting that these symbols existed in Abrahamic religions, despite the fact that most adherents to traditional Hebraic, Muslim, and Christian faiths are far removed from the notion that the interaction between the serpent and Eve in the Garden of Eden has anything to do with sexual encounter and transmission of forbidden knowledge, which we now know it has by our study last night. And I've got to leave off there. Well, wait, there's 2 sentences left in this section. In Hinduism, the Kundalini is a coiled serpent that sits metaphorically at the base of the spine, a symbolic of that residual power of pure desire and sexual passion. The Hebrews and Sumerians have been touched on quite extensively thus far, but let's do a little brief recap, then move on to some other examples. And then we go into the next section of this chapter. We made it to page 98. We got 10 pages into the 30. So there you go, folks. That's tonight's reading. And we got 6 minutes until, less than that, 5 minutes, until I join up with Rocky here. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to call it quits for tonight. I appreciate everybody's here. Thank you for being here. It's a short night tonight. We got to deliberately cut this short, so I can't really dig too much into questions and so on. But I've got to do this because I was sandwiched between the shows tonight. And I've got to go join Rocky now for our interview with Peter Robbins. So come on over to Rocky's channel. Let's go take a look. Go line up over there. Get ready. Audrey, thank you for that. My website, scottallenroberts.com. You can go there and find links to everything I do. And go get my Reptilian t-shirt that we did especially for this reading. You'll find that at my Etsy page. And that's etsy.com/shop/sonofapatriot. And I appreciate you all being here. Thank you for letting me plug my junk at the end there. I'm going to give you 4 minutes now and some few seconds to go get ready for Rocky and me and Peter Robbins. Thanks for being here. You don't know how much I appreciate it. We'll see you again tomorrow night. We'll be back. Good night for now.